What happens when the biggest online store in Russia starts burning to the ground, one warehouse at a time? Something strange is happening inside Russia right now, and almost nobody outside the country is talking about it. A company bigger than most people realize is quietly collapsing under fire, and the smoke from its warehouses can be seen from space. Before we go further, if you want to see exactly how this crisis unfolded day by day, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell, because this story is moving fast, and you do not want to miss what happens next. And if this video keeps you hooked, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep bringing you stories nobody else is covering. Now let's get into it. There's a company in Russia called Wildberries. If you have never heard of it, think of it as Russia's version of Amazon. It is massive. It sells clothes, electronics, home goods, tools, groceries, almost everything a household could need. Millions of Russians order from it every single day. It employs close to 100,000 people. It operates more than 200 logistics centers scattered across the country, covering a jaw-dropping 5.5 million square meters of warehouse space. Size of 700 football fields, all packed with shelves, conveyor belts, and workers rushing to get packages out the door. For years, Wildberries was seen as untouchable. It was a symbol of everyday Russian life continuing on, no matter what was happening on the battlefield in Ukraine. People could still order a new pair of shoes. They could still get their groceries delivered. Life, on the surface, looked normal. That illusion is now falling apart. Over the last few weeks, Ukraine has launched a campaign unlike anything we have seen so far in this war. Instead of hitting the front lines, instead of targeting tanks or trenches, Ukrainian forces turned their attention to something nobody expected: Russia's internal supply chain. And the results have been staggering. In a matter of days, 10 of the most important Wildberries logistics hubs were hit by drone strikes. Not grazed, not lightly damaged, hit hard enough to knock them out of action. Fires broke out, roofs collapsed. Entire buildings that once held millions of dollars worth of goods turned into piles of ash and twisted metal. And here's the part that should really make you pause. The weapon Ukraine used to do all of this is not some multi-million-dollar missile system. It is a drone called the FP-1, built by a Ukrainian company called Firepoint. Each one costs around $55,000. That is less than the price of a decent house in some cities. Yet these cheap, relatively simple machines, with a range of over 1,600 kilometers, managed to wipe out close to 10% of one of Russia's largest logistics networks in about a week. Think about that math for a second. $55,000 against a facility that might be worth tens of millions. This is what people mean when they talk about asymmetric warfare. You do not need to match your enemy dollar for dollar or missile for missile. You just need to find the weak point and hit it precisely, again and again, until the whole system starts to buckle. And it did buckle. Estimates now put the total economic damage from this strike campaign at close to $3 billion. $3 billion from an enemy spending a fraction of that to make it happen. But the money is only part of the story. The real story is what happened to the people inside those buildings when the drones started coming. Picture this. You are a warehouse worker in Russia, somewhere far from what you thought was a war zone. You go to work every day thinking you are safe because you are not a soldier, you're not near the front line, you're just packing boxes and scanning barcodes. Then one day, an alarm goes off. Not a fire drill, a real one. And you hear it. That low buzzing hum in the sky that everyone in this war has learned to fear. Then an explosion. Then smoke pouring through the ceiling vents. That is not a hypothetical. That has now happened over and over again at Wildberries facilities across Russia. Workers have been filmed sprinting out of buildings in a panic, phones in hand, filming the flames eating through the roof of the place where they worked just minutes earlier. Some of these videos have gone viral inside Russia itself, spreading faster than the authorities can control the narrative around them. And here's something that should tell you everything about how deep this fear has gone. In one video that spread widely, a Wildberries worker was asked how they felt about what was happening. Their answer was not about the war in some abstract sense. It was direct anger, aimed at their own government. They said they were disappointed in their own authorities because they let this happen. Not the enemy. Their own leaders. That is a dangerous sentence for any government to hear from its own workers. Think about the psychology of that moment for a second. War, for most of these workers, used to be something that happened on a screen. Something you saw on the news, something happening far away, to soldiers, in places with names you only half remembered. It was never supposed to reach the warehouse down the road where you clock in every morning at 8. It was never supposed to be the reason your coworker breaks down crying because the section where she has worked for 3 years just went up in flames. That gap between what war is supposed to feel like and what it now actually feels like for these workers is exactly why this story matters so much. It is the moment abstract news becomes personal fear. And fear like that does not stay contained inside one warehouse. It spreads through group chats, through family dinners, through whispered conversations at bus stops. Every burned building becomes a story that 100 more people hear about within hours, whether the government wants them to or not. Let's talk about where exactly these strikes hit, because the geography tells its own story. It started near Moscow, a major facility in Elektrostal, roughly 60 kilometers from the Russian capital, was one of the first to suffer serious structural damage. Around the same time, a logistics base in the Tambov region was hit hard enough to shut down completely, indefinitely. Then came a night strike on a massive complex that employed about 4,500 workers, a facility so large that disabling it sent shockwaves through the local economy of the surrounding town. From there, the strikes did not stop. They spread south toward Krasnodar and Novorossiysk, hitting sorting centers that fed goods into southern Russia. Then they moved north toward St. Petersburg, striking a massive facility in the Shushery district. Ukraine even reached into occupied Crimea, hitting a logistics base in Simferopol, sending a clear message that no region, not even the annexed peninsula, was considered off limits. One of the most devastating strikes hit the Ryazan region, an area that also happens to host oil refineries important to Russia's fuel production. The fire there was so intense that the facility was essentially wiped off the operational map. By the time you add it all up, open source estimates suggest that over 500,000 square meters of warehouse space was either completely destroyed or damaged beyond any practical use. That is over 500,000 square meters of storage gone in the span of just a few weeks. Now, here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. How does a country like Ukraine, fighting a much larger and better funded enemy, manage to pull off something this precise across such a wide stretch of territory, hitting exactly the right targets at exactly the right time? What if the country that spent 4 years begging the world for weapons just became the one supplying weapons to the most powerful military on Earth? And what if that single move just rewrote the entire balance of power between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing? Before we go further, hit subscribe, tap that like button, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what's really happening right now. This story is moving fast, and you don't want to miss what comes next. Rewind about 18 months. Picture that tense moment inside the Oval Office when the American president looked at Ukraine's leader and told him bluntly that he was out of cards to play. It was a humiliating moment broadcast to the entire world. Ukraine looked weak, dependent, almost powerless at the negotiating table. Back then, most analysts assumed Ukraine's future depended entirely on the goodwill of others, on whether Washington felt generous enough to keep sending aid. 18 months later, that entire picture is flipped upside down. Reports now indicate that Ukraine has done something no one predicted, something that sounds almost unbelievable if you had heard it back then. Instead of simply receiving weapons, Ukraine has reportedly begun exporting combat-ready attack drones directly to the United States military. According to reports, an initial batch of around 2,000 F-10 kamikaze drones has been delivered to American armed forces and put into active service. Think about that for a second. A country still fighting for its own survival is now reportedly arming the most powerful military alliance on the planet. This isn't just a trade deal, this is a complete reversal of roles. For years, the story was simple. Ukraine asks, the West gives. Now, according to these reports, Ukraine is the one supplying critical technology that the American military reportedly needs. And that single shift changes everything about how Kyiv sits at the table when it comes to future negotiations with Russia. Let's talk about why this matters so much, and why it could reportedly reshape everything from the war in Ukraine to America's tensions with Iran to the growing rivalry between Washington and Beijing. To understand why this drone deal is such a big deal, you first need to understand what these drones actually are and why the American military reportedly wanted them so badly. The F-10 is described as a small, agile quadcopter drone, the kind you steer yourself in real time using first-person video, similar to a video game controller. It doesn't fly a fixed path. It doesn't rely purely on GPS coordinates. A human operator watches through its camera and guides it directly onto a target, whether that's an armored vehicle, a piece of military equipment, or enemy personnel in the field. This kind of drone has reportedly been tested extensively on the battlefield in Ukraine, refined through years of brutal, real combat conditions that no laboratory could ever replicate. Here's the detail that reportedly matters most to American defense planners. The F-10 is said to contain 0 components sourced from China. In today's world, that is an enormous advantage. American defense procurement law is notoriously strict about supply chains, components originating from geopolitical rivals. A drone built entirely outside that supply chain can reportedly move through approval processes far faster than something tangled up in complicated sourcing rules. So while other systems might sit in bureaucratic limbo for years, this one could reportedly be fast-tracked into active service almost immediately. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting, because this deal reportedly isn't just about Ukraine and Russia anymore. It's about a completely different conflict happening thousands of miles away in the Middle East. According to reports citing sources familiar with recent military operations, the United States has suffered significant losses in its ongoing confrontation with Iran and Iran-aligned forces. Between February and April of 2026, reports suggest the U.S. military lost at least 24 MQ-9 Reaper drones, each one costing somewhere between $30 and $50 million. Multiply that out, and you're looking at losses reportedly approaching $1 billion in just a few short months. These are enormous, sophisticated aircraft built for long-range surveillance and precision strikes. Losing that many, that fast, is reportedly a serious wound to any military budget, no matter how large. This is exactly where the F-10 becomes so valuable. Instead of relying purely on expensive, heavy systems that cost tens of millions of dollars each, the American military reportedly gains access to a completely different kind of tool. Something small, something cheap, something that costs only a few $100s per unit. If it gets shot down, it barely registers as a financial loss. But because a human operator is guiding it in real time, it can reportedly still deliver precise, devastating strikes against enemy positions, vehicles, and personnel dug into defensive positions. Let's compare this directly to what Iran has reportedly been using as its primary strike weapon, the Shahed series of drones. The Shahed 136 is built completely differently. It's a long-range delta-wing aircraft, capable of striking targets from 1,000 to 2,500 kilometers away, carrying a heavy warhead of up to 90 kilograms. It's essentially a slow, cheap cruise missile, flying a pre-programmed path toward a fixed target. It doesn't maneuver. It doesn't adapt. It simply flies until it hits whatever coordinates it was given. The F-10 operates in a completely different world. Its range is short, somewhere between 5 and 30 kilometers. But within that range, it's alive in a way the Shahed never is. An operator watches its camera feed and adjusts its path in real time, picking the exact right moment and angle to strike. Its warhead is tiny by comparison, often less than a tenth of what a Shahed carries. But it doesn't need a massive warhead, because it hits exactly where it's aimed, not just somewhere in the general vicinity. And the price difference is staggering. A single Iranian Shahed drone reportedly costs somewhere between $20,000 and $80,000. An F-10 can reportedly be produced for a small fraction of that, which means instead of countering expensive drone attacks with even more expensive missile interceptors, the American military may now have access to a low-cost swarm option of its own, something that can reportedly go head-to-head with cheap enemy drones without draining the defense budget every single time one gets used. This matters enormously for the ongoing tension with Iran-backed groups across the Middle East. Instead of using multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles to shoot down cheap enemy drones, a losing financial equation, if there ever was one, American forces could reportedly use similarly cheap drones to hunt down enemy fighters and equipment before those threats ever get the chance to launch. It flips the entire cost equation of modern warfare on its head. To fully grasp how serious this shift is, look at the numbers behind America's own drone ambitions. Reports indicate the Pentagon has allocated over $1 billion, specifically toward what's being called a drone dominance initiative, with a goal of acquiring more than 200,000 low-cost attack drones by 2027. That's an enormous target. And here's the question that really matters. Can Ukraine, a country still fighting a brutal war on its own soil, actually deliver on a demand that large? According to reports, the answer is a resounding yes. Ukraine's domestic drone industry has reportedly scaled at an almost unimaginable pace throughout this war, driven by pure necessity. Estimates suggest Ukraine is on track to produce somewhere between 6 and 7 million attack drones during 2026 alone. To put that into perspective, some reports suggest Ukrainian factories can reportedly produce roughly 500,000 drones in a single month. Compare that to an American defense industry that would 100,000 units total, starting from scratch, and you start to understand why this partnership makes so much sense for both sides. Adding even more weight to this shift, reports indicate that F-Drones, the Ukrainian company behind the F-10, is investing over $18 million to build a new manufacturing facility inside the United States, reportedly in the state of Ohio. That's not a temporary arrangement. That's not a one-time shipment. That's the foundation of a long-term industrial partnership, one that could keep growing for years to come. If you're starting to see just how much this story matters, make sure to drop a comment below telling me which part surprised you the most. I read every single one, and I want to know what stood out to you. Now let's shift our focus to what might be the most important part of this entire story. Because while the United States reportedly gains a valuable new weapon, it's Ukraine that stands to gain the most from this arrangement in ways that go far beyond money. Think back to that painful moment in the Oval Office, when Ukraine's leader was reportedly told his negotiating position had nothing left to offer. For a long time afterward, thus that image defined how much of the world viewed Ukraine, a nation dependent on charity, begging allies to keep the weapons flowing with very little leverage of its own. That perception has reportedly started to shift in a dramatic way. By reportedly becoming a supplier to the American military instead of merely a recipient of aid, Ukraine has repositioned itself entirely. It's no longer just a partner asking for help. It's reportedly becoming a partner that other militaries actively need. That distinction matters enormously in the world of international diplomacy, where leverage often determines outcomes far more than moral arguments ever could. According to reports, this shift already appears to be paying off. Ukraine's leader is said to have taken a noticeably firmer tone during recent high-level meetings, including talks at a NATO summit and subsequent discussions at the White House. Suggests the American administration's language toward Ukraine has grown visibly warmer since this drone agreement began taking shape. That's not a coincidence. When you're the side offering something valuable, rather than the side asking for favors, the entire tone of a relationship tends to change. What does Ukraine reportedly hope to gain from all of this in return? According to multiple reports, one of the biggest priorities is access to Patriot air defense missile licenses. Ukraine's Patriot systems have reportedly been stretched to their limits. Russian missile and drone attacks. Some reports suggest America's own Patriot missile stockpiles have been significantly depleted by the ongoing conflict with Iran, reportedly by as much as 2/3, forcing new production lines to be established just to keep up with demand. In that kind of environment, direct licensing agreements could reportedly allow Ukraine to manufacture these critical interceptors closer to where they're actually needed, rather than waiting on shipments that may or may not arrive in time. Beyond Patriot missiles, reports suggest discussions may also include access to long-range Tomahawk missiles and other advanced American munitions, weapons that could dramatically expand Ukraine's ability to strike deep behind enemy lines. If even a portion of these reported discussions become reality, Ukraine's military capability could look dramatically different heading into the next phase of this war. Now think about what this means for any future peace negotiations. For years, one of the core arguments used against Ukraine, reportedly pushed heavily by Russian officials and state media, was the idea that Ukraine was simply a pawn, a country that would eventually be abandoned once Western patience or Western money ran out. That argument becomes much harder to sustain when Ukraine is reportedly supplying critical technology to the very military that would supposedly abandon it. If Ukraine sits down at a future negotiating table, backed not just by financial promises, but by a functioning industrial partnership that the American military reportedly relies on, the entire dynamic shifts. Reports suggest a political reality where walking away from Ukraine or pressuring it into harsh territorial concessions becomes a far more complicated decision for any American administration, especially one that reportedly values commercial relationships and mutual benefit as heavily as this one does. This is where the story reportedly becomes especially painful for Moscow to watch unfold. For years, Russian strategy reportedly banked on a simple bet, that Western support for Ukraine was fragile, dependent purely on political mood, and could evaporate the moment leadership changed in Washington. That bet reportedly just got a lot riskier. According to reports, the new framework behind this drone partnership isn't just a political favor that could disappear with the next election cycle. It's reportedly being built into a formal commercial and institutional structure, involving direct contracts between Ukrainian producers and American defense companies. If that's accurate, it means this relationship wouldn't simply depend on which political party happens to be in office. It would function more like an ordinary business partnership, the kind that tends to survive political turbulence far better than foreign aid packages ever do. For Russia, that's reportedly a genuinely alarming development. Instead of facing a Ukraine that depends entirely on the generosity of foreign governments, Russian military planners may increasingly be facing a Ukraine that's becoming permanently woven into the industrial fabric of the Western defense world. Reports suggest that a portion of the revenue generated through these drone contracts, reportedly around 1/5, flows directly back into Ukraine's state budget. That would represent a genuinely new and renewable source of war financing, one that doesn't depend on begging allies for the next aid package. Before we go further, here's something simple you can do. If this video is helping you understand a story that mainstream coverage barely touches, share it right now with one person who still thinks Ukraine has no leverage left. It only takes a few seconds, and it genuinely helps this channel keep bringing you stories like this one. Let's step back for a moment and look at how Russia and China are reportedly responding to all of this, because neither country is simply standing still while these changes unfold. According to reports, Russia has launched a massive industrial mobilization of its own throughout 2026, aiming to push more than 7 million first-person view attack drones onto the battlefield by the end of the year. Ukraine's own reported production targets. Russia isn't just trying to match Ukraine in sheer quantity. Either reports suggest Russian engineers have been developing new generations of drones as well, including a series known as Molnya, alongside fiber optic controlled drones specifically designed to overcome one of Ukraine's biggest battlefield advantages, electronic jamming. Here's how that technology reportedly works. Instead of communicating with its operator through radio signals, which can be jammed or intercepted, a fiber optic drone reportedly trails a physical cable behind it, connecting it directly to its controller. That makes it almost completely immune to electronic warfare. No jamming signal can interrupt a physical wire. Reports also suggest Russia has been integrating jet engines into Iranian-designed Geron drones, essentially creating faster, harder-to-intercept versions of the slower Shahid-style weapons, specifically to overwhelm Ukrainian air defense systems before they have time to react. So how do these Russian innovations reportedly stack up against the F-10 drones now reportedly in American hands? Each system reportedly has its own strengths and weaknesses. The F-10 offers incredible maneuverability and doesn't require any physical tether, giving it freedom of movement that fiber optic drones simply don't have. But those same fiber optic Russian drones are reportedly immune to a form of jamming that can sometimes disrupt radio-controlled systems like the F-10. On the other hand, that trailing cable creates its own serious problem. In dense forests, battlefields, that physical wire can reportedly get snagged, tangled, or severed, disabling the drone completely. Meanwhile, according to reports, China has reportedly taken an entirely different approach, one that looks less like tactical drone warfare and more like something out of a science fiction battlefield. Reports describe a massive drone carrier system, sometimes referred to as a mothership, reportedly capable of carrying and releasing more than 100 smaller attack drones from a single platform in one coordinated swarm. China has reportedly also been converting older fighter jets into fully autonomous, unmanned kamikaze aircraft, effectively building a ghost fleet of pilotless combat planes. On paper, that kind of technology sounds terrifying. A single flying platform unleashing 100 drones at once, coordinated as a swarm. But according to military analysts examining these reports, there's a serious vulnerability hiding inside that impressive design. A massive mothership carrying dozens or even hundreds of drones is also, by definition, a massive target. If an air defense system manages to strike that single aircraft before it releases its swarm, the entire operation could reportedly be wiped out in one moment, along with every drone it was carrying. Compare that to Ukraine's decentralized approach, reflected in how the F-10 is reportedly deployed. Instead of relying on one massive, expensive platform, small two-person infantry teams can reportedly launch these drones from almost anywhere. A muddy trench, a shattered building, the back of a pickup truck. There's no single point of failure. You can't destroy an entire drone fleet with one lucky strike, because there is no centralized fleet to destroy in the first place. Every unit operates independently, and losing one changes almost nothing about the overall capability still active on the battlefield. This contrast reportedly matters enormously for how the United States is positioning itself against China's growing military ambitions. While China's mothership concept might dominate a military parade or a promotional video, a decentralized, low-cost, hard-to-detect system like the F-10 may offer something more valuable in an actual combat scenario: resilience. A system that survives isn't necessarily the biggest or most impressive one. It's the one that's cheapest to replace and hardest to fully eliminate. So what does all of this really tell us about where modern warfare is heading? For most of the last century, military power was measured in tanks, aircraft carriers, and massive standing armies. Whoever had the biggest, most expensive arsenal usually had the advantage. This story suggests something very different might be emerging. Small, smart, adaptable systems, built cheaply and produced in massive quantities, may increasingly outperform expensive, complex platforms that take years to design and cost fortunes to replace. Ukraine's transformation reflects that shift perfectly. That's part of what makes this story so remarkable. The very thing that made Ukraine's early years in this war so painful, the desperate need to build cheap, effective weapons fast because nothing else was available, has reportedly turned into one of its greatest strategic assets. Necessity forced innovation. Innovation forced rapid iteration. And rapid iteration, tested constantly in real combat, reportedly produced a level of battlefield-proven expertise that older, slower defense industries simply cannot match, no matter how much money they have. If you're enjoying this deep dive into how the balance of global power is shifting in real time, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button now, because stories like this one are unfolding faster than most news outlets can keep up with. And I want you to be among the first to know when the next major shift happens. Next door, reports suggest several European governments have already begun exploring closer defense industry ties with Ukraine, and this drone agreement could reportedly accelerate that trend significantly. There's also a deeper question worth considering. For decades, international peace negotiations have largely revolved around territory, borders, and traditional military assets, soldiers, tanks, aircraft. But as autonomous systems become more central to how modern wars are actually fought and won, future negotiations may increasingly need to account for something entirely different: control over drone technology, production capacity, and the industrial base behind these systems. Reports suggest that Ukraine's growing importance in this specific area could reportedly give it influence at the negotiating table that has very little to do with how much territory it currently controls. You can wait out a government's changing political mood. It's much harder to wait out an active, profitable business relationship that both sides have a direct financial interest in maintaining. At the same time, we have to stay grounded and realistic. This drone deal alone won't decide the outcome of the war. Russia still commands an enormous military, still controls significant Ukrainian territory, backed down from its core objectives despite years of sanctions and battlefield setbacks. China, meanwhile, continues advancing its own military technology at a rapid pace, and reports of a single, if serious, vulnerability in their drone carrier concept doesn't mean that technology won't evolve and improve over time. This is not a story with a single dramatic conclusion. It's a story about how the underlying rules of modern warfare and the underlying rules of international leverage appear to be shifting in real time. But here's what does seem clear, based on everything we've walked through. The relationship between Ukraine and its Western allies is reportedly transforming into something fundamentally different than it was even 2 years ago. A besieged nation depending entirely on outside charity has reportedly evolved into something far more complex, a genuine industrial and technological partnership, one where value increasingly flows in both directions rather than just one. Think about the sheer symbolism of this moment. A country that was reportedly told, to its face, that it had run out of options, that its cards were exhausted, has instead reportedly become a supplier of critical technology to the most powerful military alliance in human history. That's not just a footnote in this war. That's reportedly one of the most significant reversals of fortune we've witnessed in modern geopolitics. And for Vladimir Putin, watching from Moscow, this development likely represents something deeply unsettling. For China, this moment likely serves as a quiet but important warning as well. The assumption that raw scale and impressive-looking technology automatically translates into battlefield dominance is reportedly being challenged by a much smaller, much poorer nation that's been forced to master flexibility, speed, and cost efficiency out of sheer survival instinct. Isn't the one with the biggest budget? It's the one who's already been tested under fire and who has nothing left to lose. So where does this leave us? Cheap, brilliantly adaptive machines built by people who simply refuse to give up. Whatever happens next, one thing already seems certain. The old assumptions about who holds power in this conflict and how that power is measured no longer apply the way they used to. And that shift alone may end up shaping the outcome of this war and the future of global military strategy, far more than any single battlefield victory ever could. If this story opened your eyes to just how much has changed behind the scenes, make sure you're subscribed, drop a like on this video, and share it with someone who still thinks this war looks the same as it did 2 years ago. Let me know in the comments what you think happens next, whether you believe this partnership will keep growing, and whether you think it changes how this war eventually ends. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.